My beloved child, do not skip this message, because the story you are about to hear feels almost impossible to believe. It began on a night that seemed completely ordinary. There was no warning. No dramatic event. No sign that anything unusual was about to happen. Yet behind closed doors, a conversation was unfolding that would leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. Your soulmate's family had gathered together. At first, the gathering was no different from countless others. People shared stories, laughed about old memories, and talked about the events happening in their lives. The atmosphere was warm and familiar. No one expected the conversation to take an unexpected turn. But then something happened. Your name entered the discussion. Not because someone planned it. Not because anyone forced the topic. It simply appeared naturally, as though it had been waiting for the right moment. And the moment your name was mentioned, the entire energy of the room shifted. My beloved child, your soulmate immediately became quieter. Not in a way that anyone could easily explain. But enough for those closest to them to notice. Family members exchanged subtle glances. Some smiled. Others became curious. Because they had noticed something long before that evening. They had noticed the way your soulmate spoke about you. The way their face changed whenever your name appeared in conversation. The way certain memories seemed to hold special meaning. And for the first time, those observations began turning into a deeper discussion. Stay with me, my beloved child, because what happened next surprised everyone. One family member spoke first. They shared a simple observation. They said that whenever your name came up, your soulmate seemed different. More attentive. More thoughtful. More emotionally present. At first everyone laughed gently. But then another family member agreed. Then another. Then another. Before long, stories began emerging from different corners of the room. Stories about moments your soulmate probably thought no one had noticed. Moments when they spoke about you unexpectedly. Moments when they defended you. Moments when they smiled while remembering something connected to you. Moments when your presence seemed to affect them more deeply than they realized. My beloved child, your soulmate sat there listening as one observation after another was shared. And with every story, it became harder for them to deny what everyone else was seeing. The family was not discussing rumors. They were discussing patterns. Patterns that had been visible for a long time. Patterns that revealed emotions your soulmate had worked hard to keep private. As the conversation continued, something remarkable happened. The discussion stopped being about you alone. It became about the impact you had made. Family members began talking about how much your soulmate had changed over time. How they seemed wiser. More mature. More reflective. More aware of their emotions than before. Some even noticed a growth in confidence and understanding that had not existed years earlier. And whether your soulmate wanted to admit it or not, many of those changes seemed connected to experiences involving you. My beloved child, hearing this was emotional. Because sometimes other people can see our transformation more clearly than we can see it ourselves. Your soulmate had been focused on daily life. Focused on responsibilities. Focused on moving forward. Yet their family was quietly noticing every step of their growth. And now those observations were finally being spoken aloud. One family member eventually asked a question that changed the entire conversation. "What do you think this person truly means to you?" The room became silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind of silence that appears when a meaningful question has been asked. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. They looked down. They reflected. They searched for words. Because for the first time, they were being invited to speak honestly in front of people who knew them best. My beloved child, that moment felt bigger than anyone expected. Not because of what was said, but because of what was finally being acknowledged. The feelings. The memories. The significance. The impact. Everything that had remained hidden beneath the surface for so long. And as your soulmate prepared to answer, they realized something surprising. The truth had become impossible to ignore. Not because someone forced it. Not because someone exposed it. But because too many people had noticed the same thing. Too many people had seen the same emotions. Too many people had witnessed the same connection. And what your soulmate finally admits during that conversation leaves the entire room speechless. Because for the first time, they stop speaking from their mind. And begin speaking directly from their heart. My beloved child, what happened next changed everything. And the truth that emerged that night would continue echoing in their heart long after the gathering came to an end. My beloved child, after that question was asked, the room remained completely silent. No one rushed your soulmate. No one interrupted. Everyone simply waited. Because they could see something important was happening. For perhaps the first time in a very long while, your soulmate was confronting feelings they usually kept hidden. The question lingered in the air. What does this person truly mean to you? It seemed simple. Yet it carried a weight that reached deep into the heart. My beloved child, your soulmate looked around the room and saw familiar faces. People who had known them for years. People who had watched them grow. People who could recognize when something mattered, even when they tried to hide it. And in that moment, pretending no longer felt possible. For too long, they had avoided giving a clear answer. They had convinced themselves that silence was easier. That avoiding the subject was safer. That keeping certain emotions private would somehow make them easier to manage. But now, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about them, the truth was slowly rising to the surface. Stay with me, my beloved child, because what happened next touched everyone in the room. Your soulmate finally spoke. Their voice was calm. Their words were careful. But the emotion behind them was impossible to miss. They admitted that you had left a lasting impact on their life. Not because everything had been perfect. Not because every moment had been easy. But because some people change us simply by being part of our journey. The room became even quieter. Family members listened closely. Not one person looked away. Because they could hear the sincerity in every word. My beloved child, as your soulmate continued speaking, memories began surfacing. Stories they had never shared. Thoughts they had never spoken aloud. lessons they had learned through experiences connected to you. And suddenly, what started as a casual family gathering became something much deeper. It became a conversation about growth, about transformation, about the people who help shape our lives. One family member smiled gently and said something unexpected. "You know, we've noticed this for a long time." Those words caught your soulmate by surprise. Because they had spent so much energy trying to hide their feelings. Yet the people closest to them had seen through it all along. They had noticed the way your name changed the conversation. They had noticed the way your soulmate became more thoughtful whenever you were mentioned. They had noticed the respect, the care, and the meaning behind every story involving you. My beloved child, hearing this created an emotional moment. Not because your soulmate felt exposed, but because they felt understood. Sometimes the greatest relief comes from realizing that you no longer have to carry something alone. And that is exactly what happened that night. The walls began to come down. The defenses began to soften. The fear of being honest slowly disappeared. And in its place came something far more powerful. Acceptance. As the discussion continued, another family member spoke up. They shared how much your soulmate had grown over the past few years. How they seemed more mature, more patient, more aware of what truly mattered in life. And they asked a question that nobody expected. What if this person helped you become the version of yourself that we see today? My beloved child, those words struck deeply. Because your soulmate had never considered the journey from that perspective before. They had focused on memories, focused on emotions, focused on questions. But now they were being invited to focus on something else. The growth, the lessons, the transformation. And the more they reflected on it, the more they realized how much truth was hidden within that question. The conversation continued late into the evening. Stories were shared. Lessons were discussed. Laughter mixed with emotion. And for the first time, your soulmate felt completely comfortable speaking honestly about what they had experienced. There was no judgment, no criticism, no pressure, only understanding. My beloved child, when the gathering finally began coming to an end, your soulmate felt different. Lighter, calmer, more at peace than they had felt in a very long time. Because something important had happened that night. The feelings they once kept hidden had been acknowledged. The significance of the connection had been recognized. And the truth they spent so long avoiding was no longer something they needed to fear. But as everyone prepared to leave, one final comment was made. A comment so unexpected, so powerful, that it stopped your soulmate in their tracks. A family member looked directly at them and said, "If this person means this much to you, then perhaps there is still something important you need to understand." My beloved child, those words followed your soulmate long after the gathering ended. And as they lay awake later that night thinking about everything that had been said, a brand new realization began forming within their heart. A realization that would change the entire direction of this story. Because what they are about to discover next is something they never expected to find. And it may be the most important truth of all. My beloved child, long after the family gathering ended, your soulmate could not stop thinking about those final words. If this person means this much to you, then perhaps there is still something important you need to understand. At first, they tried to brush it aside. They told themselves it was just another comment. Just another opinion. Just another observation from someone who cared about them. But no matter how hard they tried, the words remained. They echoed through their thoughts. They followed them into the quiet hours of the night. And by morning, they were still there. My beloved child, something had awakened inside your soulmate. Not confusion. Not fear. But curiosity. A deep curiosity about their own heart. For years, they had focused on avoiding difficult questions. Now they found themselves wanting answers. Not answers from other people. Not answers from predictions. But answers from within themselves. Stay with me, my beloved child, because this is where the story takes an emotional turn. The next day, your soulmate found themselves revisiting memories they had not thought about in a long time. Not because they were trying to live in the past, but because those memories suddenly seemed important. They remembered conversations that once felt ordinary. Moments that once seemed small. Experiences they thought they had moved beyond. Yet now, each memory carried a lesson. Each memory revealed something new. Each memory seemed to shine a light on a truth they had overlooked. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. My beloved child, every meaningful memory shared one thing in common. Growth. Every challenge had taught them something. Every joyful moment had taught them something. Every difficult chapter had taught them something. And somehow, when they looked at the bigger picture, they realized that you had been connected to many of those lessons. Not because you controlled their journey. Not because you determined their future. But because your presence had encouraged them to see life differently. That realization stayed with them throughout the day. And the more they reflected on it, the more emotional they became. Because they were beginning to understand something they had never fully acknowledged before. You were not simply someone they remembered. You were someone who helped shape part of their story. My beloved child, later that evening, your soulmate received a message from one of the family members who had attended the gathering. The message was simple, yet powerful. It said, "Last night reminded me how much you've grown. Don't forget that." At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary message. But for your soulmate, it felt significant. Because it reinforced everything they had been thinking about. The growth. The lessons. The transformation. The journey. And for the first time, they stopped viewing the story through the lens of what had happened. Instead, they began viewing it through the lens of what they had learned. That change in perspective was powerful. Because learning creates peace where confusion once existed. My beloved child, as the night grew darker, your soulmates sat quietly and asked themselves a question they had never asked before. What if this connection came into my life for a reason greater than I understood at the time? The answer did not arrive immediately. But the question itself opened a new door. A door leading toward understanding. A door leading toward acceptance. A door leading toward a truth they had spent years avoiding. And as they sat there reflecting, they noticed something surprising. The fear was disappearing. The fear of being honest. The fear of facing emotions. The fear of acknowledging what mattered. All of it was fading away. Because the truth no longer felt threatening. It felt freeing. Stay with me, my beloved child, because something remarkable is about to happen. For the first time in a very long while, your soulmate began feeling grateful for the journey. Not grateful because everything had gone perfectly. Not grateful because there were no challenges. But grateful because every experience had contributed to who they were today. Every lesson had value. Every memory had meaning. Every chapter had purpose. And that realization filled their heart with peace. A peace they had not felt in years. Yet even as this peace settled within them, another realization was beginning to form. A realization bigger than any they had experienced so far. A realization that would connect every conversation from that family gathering, every memory that resurfaced, and every lesson they had learned. And my beloved child, when that realization finally becomes clear, it will reveal something so meaningful that your soulmate will never see this journey the same way again. Because the truth waiting ahead is not about the past. It is about understanding the purpose that was hidden within it all along. My beloved child, as the days passed after that family gathering, your soulmate noticed something they could no longer ignore. The more they reflected on everything that had been said, the more a quiet truth began taking shape within their heart. It was not a sudden revelation. It was not a dramatic moment. It was something deeper. Something that grew stronger with every memory, every lesson, and every moment of honest reflection. For years, they had been focused on understanding the connection itself. Now they were beginning to understand its purpose. And that changed everything. My beloved child, one evening they found themselves sitting alone, thinking about all the people who had crossed their path throughout life. Some had stayed. Some had left. Some had taught valuable lessons. Others had simply been brief chapters. But when they thought about you, something felt different. Your memory carried weight. Not the weight of sadness. Not the weight of regret. The weight of meaning. And meaning is something that time cannot easily erase. The more they reflected, the more they realized that the people who leave the deepest impact are often the people who help us discover parts of ourselves we never knew existed. Stay with me, my beloved child, because the story is reaching one of its most important moments. The words from their family continued echoing in their mind. Especially one statement. We've seen how much you've grown. At first, they thought their family was simply being kind. But now they were beginning to see the truth behind those words. The growth was real. The transformation was real. The lessons were real. And perhaps the reason the conversation affected them so deeply was because their family had seen something they were only now recognizing for themselves. They had become a different person. A stronger person. A wiser person. A more emotionally aware person. And every chapter of the journey had contributed to that growth. My beloved child, as this realization settled into their heart, something beautiful happened. They stopped looking at the past through the lens of loss. Instead, they began looking at it through the lens of gratitude. Gratitude for every lesson. Gratitude for every memory. Gratitude for every challenge that pushed them to grow. Because growth is often hidden inside experiences we do not fully understand until much later. That night, your soulmate found themselves smiling unexpectedly. Not because they had discovered all the answers, but because they no longer felt trapped by the questions. For the first time, they felt free to appreciate the journey exactly as it was. And that freedom brought peace. Real peace. The kind of peace that arrives when a person finally stops fighting their own truth. My beloved child, later that evening, another message arrived from a family member. It was short, simple, but powerful. It said, "Whatever happens in the future, never forget how far you've come." Those words touched something deep within their heart. Because they realized that the family gathering had never been about convincing them of anything. It had never been about pressure. It had never been about expectations. It had been about reminding them of their growth. Reminding them of their strength. Reminding them of the person they had become. And suddenly everything began making sense. The conversation. The emotions. The memories. The reflections. All of it had led to this moment of understanding. Stay with me, my beloved child, because something extraordinary is now unfolding. Your soulmate is beginning to see that the greatest gift they received was not an answer. It was clarity. Clarity about themselves. Clarity about their journey. Clarity about the lessons that shaped them. And with that clarity comes a new beginning. A beginning built on confidence rather than doubt. On understanding rather than confusion. On gratitude rather than regret. The heart that once searched endlessly for explanations is finally finding rest. The mind that once questioned everything is finally finding peace. And as they continue moving forward, a final realization is waiting just ahead. A realization so powerful that it will tie together every conversation, every memory, every lesson, and every emotion that has been part of this journey. And my beloved child, when that final truth arrives, it will not feel like the end of a story. It will feel like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter filled with hope, wisdom, and a heart that is finally at peace. My beloved child, after everything that was said during that family gathering, after every memory that resurfaced and every lesson that revealed itself, your soulmate found themselves standing at a place they had never reached before. A place where they could finally see the entire journey clearly. Not just the beautiful moments. Not just the difficult moments. But the complete picture. And for the first time, they understood that every chapter had been connected in ways they never noticed before. The conversations. The emotions. The challenges. The growth. It had all been leading toward a greater understanding. Stay with me, my beloved child, because this chapter carries a powerful revelation. One afternoon, your soulmate was reflecting on the words their family had shared. They remembered the smiles. They remembered the stories. They remembered how everyone seemed to notice something they themselves had overlooked for so long. The people who loved them most had seen the changes. They had seen the maturity. They had seen the wisdom. They had seen the emotional growth. And suddenly your soulmate realized something profound. Growth often happens so gradually that we fail to notice it ourselves. Yet those who care about us can see it clearly. And that realization filled them with gratitude. Because it reminded them just how far they had come. My beloved child, as they continued reflecting, another truth began emerging. For years, they had focused on trying to understand why certain experiences happened. Why certain people entered their life. Why certain chapters unfolded the way they did. But now they were asking a completely different question. What have these experiences helped me become? And the answer was beautiful. They had become stronger. More compassionate. More understanding. More patient. More aware of what truly matters. The journey had not taken something away from them. It had given something to them. And once they understood that, everything changed. The memories felt lighter. The questions felt smaller. The uncertainty lost its power. Because they were no longer measuring the journey by what they wished had happened. They were measuring it by what they had learned. My beloved child, one evening, while sitting quietly beneath the stars, your soulmate felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Contentment. A deep sense of contentment. Not because life was perfect. Not because every mystery had been solved. But because they had finally stopped fighting the lessons. They had stopped resisting the growth. They had stopped running from the truth. And in doing so, they discovered peace. The kind of peace that cannot be forced. The kind of peace that arrives when acceptance replaces resistance. As they sat there reflecting, they thought about everything their family had shared. And one realization became impossible to ignore. The people closest to them were never trying to tell them what to feel. They were simply helping them see what had always been there. The strength. The growth. The wisdom. The transformation. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of all. My beloved child, your soulmate now stands at the edge of a new chapter. A chapter where fear no longer leads the way. A chapter where honesty is no longer something to avoid. A chapter where they can appreciate the past without becoming trapped by it. Because they finally understand something that once seemed impossible to grasp. Every meaningful experience leaves behind a gift. Sometimes that gift is wisdom. Sometimes it is strength. Sometimes it is self-discovery. And sometimes it is the realization that every challenge helps shape the person you were always meant to become. The family gathering may have started as an ordinary conversation. But it became something far greater. It became a mirror. A mirror showing your soulmate how much they had grown. How much they had learned. And how much beauty existed within their own journey. And my beloved child, as this chapter comes to a close, one final realization is quietly approaching. A realization that will bring together every lesson, every memory, every conversation, and every truth they have uncovered. A realization that will show them why this entire journey unfolded exactly as it did. And when that final truth arrives, it will fill their heart with a peace deeper than anything they have experienced before. Because sometimes the most unbelievable thing that comes out of a conversation is not a secret about someone else. Sometimes it is the discovery of who we have become. My beloved child, after all the conversations, all the reflections, all the memories that resurfaced, and all the truths that were finally acknowledged, your soulmate reached a moment that changed everything. It did not happen with a dramatic announcement. It did not happen through a shocking revelation. It happened quietly, deep within their heart. For the first time, they stopped searching for what was missing and started appreciating what had been gained. As they reflected on the family gathering, they realized something beautiful. The reason the conversation affected them so deeply was not because their family revealed a secret. It was because their family revealed a truth. A truth that had been visible all along. They showed your soulmate how much they had grown. How much they had learned. How much stronger they had become. And suddenly, every piece of the journey began fitting together. My beloved child, your soulmate finally understood that every challenge had carried a lesson. Every memory had carried meaning. Every chapter had contributed to the person they were becoming. Nothing had been wasted. Nothing had been meaningless. Even the moments that once felt confusing now seemed to have a purpose. And that realization brought a peace they had never known before. The questions that once kept them awake at night no longer felt important. The doubts that once filled their mind no longer controlled them. The fears that once held them back no longer had power over their heart. Because they had discovered something far more valuable than answers. They had discovered acceptance. They accepted the journey. They accepted the lessons. They accepted their growth. And most importantly, they accepted themselves. My beloved child, one evening after the family gathering, your soulmate found themselves smiling as they looked back on everything they had experienced. Not because every moment had been easy. Not because life had unfolded exactly as planned. But because they could finally see how every experience had shaped them into someone wiser, kinder, and stronger. They realized that meaningful connections are not measured by how long they last. They are measured by how deeply they transform us. And the transformation was undeniable. The person who once carried uncertainty now carried confidence. The person who once carried fear now carried understanding. The person who once searched endlessly for clarity had finally found it. And with that clarity came freedom. Freedom to move forward without regret. Freedom to appreciate the past without being trapped by it. Freedom to embrace the future with hope instead of fear. My beloved child, that is why this story ends beautifully. Not with sadness. Not with loss. Not with unanswered questions. But with gratitude. With healing. With wisdom. With peace. Your soulmate now walks forward with a heart that is lighter than before, carrying the lessons of the journey as treasures rather than burdens. They understand that every chapter had value. Every memory had purpose. Every challenge contributed to their growth. And because of that understanding, they no longer look back with confusion. They look back with appreciation. As they step into a new chapter of life, they do so with renewed hope, deeper self-awareness, and a heart that is finally at peace. The family gathering that seemed ordinary became the beginning of something extraordinary. It helped them see the truth. It helped them see their growth. It helped them see the beauty hidden within the journey. And my beloved child, that is the happiest ending of all. Because the greatest discovery was never about what others thought. The greatest discovery was realizing how far they had come, how much they had grown, and how bright the future truly is. The journey is complete. The lesson is understood. The heart is healed. And a beautiful new chapter is ready to begin.